The mind is very good at building labyrinths, and even better at pretending it didn't. The mind builds these structures, intricate, winding, almost amazing in their design. We like to imagine confusion comes from the outside, from circumstances, from other people, from timing, from life becoming mysteriously dramatic for no clear reason. But sometimes, if we become quiet enough, another possibility appears. The turns feel familiar, the dread feels familiar, even the sensation of being lost feels strangely rehearsed. And that is where the old Greek myth of the labyrinth becomes more than a story. Because a labyrinth was never only a building, it was a structure of secrecy, of fear, of shame, of power, and perhaps most hauntingly, of the mind. Tonight I want to walk slowly through that myth, through Crete, through King Minos, through the Minotaur, whose more human name in some tellings was Asterion, through Ariadne's thread, Theseus' victory, Ariadne's abandonment, Daedalus and Icarus, the ruins of Knossos, the psychology of the shadow, and the strange way nature itself sometimes forms labyrinths of its own. Because some stories are not truly old, they are simply waiting for the right moment to be recognized again. The story begins on the island of Crete under King Minos. Minos wanted what many rulers in myth want, not merely power, but confirmation, a sign that the gods approved of his right to rule. So he prayed to Poseidon, god of the sea, asking for a miracle, and the miracle arrived in unmistakable mythic fashion. From the sea came a magnificent white bull. The message was simple. Minos was to sacrifice the bull in honor of Poseidon. In return, his kingship would be blessed. But Minos looked at the creature and decided it was too beautiful to lose. And that is one of the myth's oldest patterns. A person is asked to surrender something and quietly decides that the rule should not apply to them. He kept the bull and made the offering with another. And in Greek myth, broken promises rarely remain abstract. They become consequences. Poseidon punished Minos, not with lightning, but with distortion. He cursed Minos' wife, Pasiphae, with a terrible and unnatural desire for the divine bull. From that union came the creature history remembers as the Minotaur, half man, half bull, a being born not only from monstrosity, but from pride, secrecy, punishment, and shame. And in some traditions, he had another name, Asterion, little star, which changes the feeling, doesn't it? The Minotaur sounds like a category. Asterion sounds like a child. Asterion sounds like someone who belonged somewhere before he became a thing to be hidden. Daedalus, the dangerous genius. Now Minos faced a problem. He could not proudly present this creature to the world, but neither could he easily destroy him. So he turned to the greatest craftsman of the ancient world, Daedalus. Daedalus is one of those mythic figures who always feels slightly too advanced for his surroundings. A master inventor, an engineer, an architect of impossible things. He was credited only not with the labyrinth, but with lifelike statues. Ancient accounts describe him as a creator of statues so lifelike that they seemed almost capable of movement. Some said his figures needed to be tied down, as though they might walk away. Even later, thinkers reflected on this idea. The philosopher Socrates once compared ideas themselves to the statues of Daedalus. He suggested that a thought, like one of those statues, could appear alive, but unless it was carefully understood, it might not stay in place. It might drift, change, slip away. And there is something quite fitting about that. The man who built the labyrinth was also imagined as someone who could give form to things that almost lived. Structures, creations, ideas, all of them just stable enough to hold and just unstable enough to move. Daedalus was also credited for the wooden cow used by PSYCHE, ingenious mechanisms, ship designs, and later the wings that would carry him and his son into the sky. In other words, Daedalus was not simply clever, he was the dangerous imagination made human. Minos ordered him to build a prison so complex that nothing trapped inside it could escape, and Daedalus obeyed. He built the labyrinth. Labyrinth or maze. Now this is where the story becomes more interesting than many modern retellings allow. Today, people often use the words maze and labyrinth as if they mean the same thing, but traditionally they do not. A maze has branching paths, wrong turns, dead ends, choices. A labyrinth, in its older classical sense, is often unicursal. One path, one winding route, one long movement inward, toward the center. No decisions, no forks, no escape through clever guessing. And somehow, that is more unsettling, because then the terror is not that you might choose badly, it is that the path itself is bringing you exactly where you do not want to go. Not confusion through endless options, but dread through inevitability. A kind of architecture made out of fate. The possibility of the dancing floor. There is another detail, quieter and stranger, that often gets left out. In Homer's Iliad, one of the earliest references tied to this tradition, there is no detailed account yet of a monster trapped inside a maze. Instead, Homer mentions an elaborate dancing floor made by Daedalus for Ariadne, a dancing floor, and the possibility lingers. What if the labyrinth was not originally imagined only as a prison? What if it began as a patterned ritual movement, as ceremonial turning, as a sacred floor traced by the body? Some scholars have wondered whether winding dances, ritual pathways, and patterned movement slowly darkened over time into the legend of the labyrinth. which is a beautiful thought, because then the labyrinth begins not only as entrapment, but as choreography, a repeated pattern, emotion so meaningful it eventually became myth. And psychologically, that feels true. Many prisons begin as patterns. Many patterns begin as rituals. And many rituals only later reveal what they have enclosed. Tribute, power, and the politics of fear. The myth then turns darker. Minos defeated Athens and demanded tribute. 7 young men, 7 young women, sent to Crete at fixed intervals, often told as every 9 years, to be fed to the Minotaur. And suddenly, the labyrinth becomes more than a hidden shame. It becomes a system, a mechanism of terror. Minos did not merely imprison the monster. He built an order around it. He fed it. He ritualized it. He turned horror into a policy. That is one of power's bleakest little gifts, the ability to take something unbearable and make it procedural. Theseus enters the story. Into that pattern steps Theseus, Prince of Athens. He volunteers to go with the tribute, determined to end the cycle. And here the myth begins to take on its familiar heroic shape. A prince enters darkness. A beast waits at the center. A kingdom is held hostage by fear. A confrontation becomes inevitable. Very noble, very dramatic, very promising. But Greek myth is rarely content to leave heroism uncomplicated. It likes its victories with side effects. Ariadne, love, and the thread. Before Theseus enters the labyrinth, he meets Ariadne, daughter of Minos and Pasiphae. And in most tellings, Ariadne falls in love with him. This is often narrated quickly, almost as if the myth is impatient to get back to the monster. But Ariadne deserves more than a brief mention, because she is not a decorative helper in someone else's triumph. She is the reason the triumph is possible at all. Without Ariadne, Theseus does not become the hero of this story. He becomes another absence inside the dark. She gives him a weapon, and then she gives him something even more important. A thread, a simple thread, no divine lightning, no shining prophecy, no dramatic celestial machinery, just a line, a small continuity between entrance and return, and that is why the thread has lasted as symbol, because what saves us is not always force. Sometimes it is relation, memory, orientation, intuition, a quiet connection to where we began. Psychologically, it may be the most important object in the entire myth, because people can survive darkness more easily than they can survive total disconnection. And then there is the tragedy beneath the romance. If the Minotaur is Asterion, and if Ariadne and the Minotaur share the same mother, then Ariadne is not simply helping a hero kill a monster. She is helping him kill her own half-brother, which turns the entire scene. Her choice is no longer just romantic, it is divided. Family against freedom, loyalty against desire, fear against escape. In myths, love often arrives with torches, and then quietly sets the house on fire. The descent into the labyrinth. Theseus ties the thread at the entrance and begins his descent. The labyrinth in later imagination is vast, dark, subterranean. Stone corridors, damp air, sharp turns, bones beneath feet, a silence so dense it begins to feel like another presence. Some descriptions speak of the smell of death, others of heavy breathing somewhere deeper in, and if the labyrinth is truly universal, then the experience becomes even more unnerving. Theseus is not wandering at random. He is being drawn inward. Each step takes him closer to the center, closer to the thing everyone has buried. There are moments in life that feel exactly like that. Not chaos, not confusion, not even the wrong decision, just the slow realization that the path itself is leading you toward something you have avoided for a very long time. The Minotaur at the center. And there at the center waits the Minotaur, or Asterion, half bull, half man, appetite fused with humanity. This is one of the reasons the image has endured, because the Minotaur is not frightening only because he is beastly. He is frightening because he is mixed. He is instinct given a human shape, hunger with a face, violence that is not foreign to us, only less controlled. In psychological readings, he becomes the shadow, the buried self, the feared self, the instinctive self, the parts hidden below ground. Do not become harmless. They become stronger, stranger, and more symbolic. Different versions describe the battle differently. Sometimes Theseus uses a sword, sometimes a club, sometimes only his hands. But the weapon matters less than the pattern. He goes inward, he confronts what the kingdom has hidden, and he survives the meeting. That is why the story has the shape of heroism. But heroism does not erase tragedy, because if the monster has a name, if the monster has kin, if the monster is also the child of a curse and a royal secret, then killing him is not only victory, it is also the final act in a family catastrophe. The return by thread. After the struggle, Theseus finds the thread, and perhaps this is where the old distinction meet between maze and labyrinth matters most. The thread may not have been needed to navigate countless wrong turns. It may have been needed to retrace the one terrible inward path, the path into darkness, and the same path back. That too feels psychological. The way out is rarely invented from nothing. It is often a return, a reorientation, a remembering. Theseus follows the thread out. He frees the surviving tributes. He escapes Crete, and with him goes Ariadne. Ariadne's abandonment. Then the myth does something quietly devastating. It refuses to end with rescue. On the island of Naxos, Ariadne is left behind. In some versions, Theseus abandons her while she sleeps. In others, Dionysus, Greek god of wine, appears in a dream and demands her. In others, a storm separates them. And in still darker tellings, Theseus simply ceases to want what once saved him. Greek myth, as always, prefers layered endings to emotional clarity, which is deeply inconvenient and also rather human. In some accounts, Ariadne dies tragically. In others, Dionysus finds her, loves her, marries her, and grants her a kind of immortality. Her crown becomes the constellation Corona Borealis, the northern crown, and there is something beautiful in that reversal. The woman abandoned on the shore becomes celestial. The overlooked helper becomes the one lifted into the sky. Ariadne begins in the maze of someone else's story and ends among the stars. Theseus, forgetfulness, and the death of AEGEUS. But the moral trouble surrounding Theseus does not end there. Before leaving Athens, he promised his father, King AEGEUS, that if he survived, he would replace the black sails of mourning with white sails of victory. A simple sign, a simple act of return, but on the journey home he forgets, or neglects, or survives one great ordeal only to fail in one smaller, devastating way afterward. AEGEUS sees the black sails from the shore, believes his son dead, and throws himself into the sea. And that sea, in mythic memory, becomes the AEGEON. So the hero's return carries death in its wake. Theseus is brave, Theseus is victorious. Theseus is careless, Theseus is betraying, Theseus is admirable, Theseus is morally unfinished, which may be the only kind of Greek myth ever truly trusted. Daedalus and Icarus. Meanwhile, Daedalus also becomes trapped in the consequences of his own genius. Having helped Ariadne and Theseus, he falls out of favor with Minos and is held on Crete. And here the irony is almost too perfect. The builder of the inescapable structure becomes its prisoner. The maker of the labyrinth is caught inside a world shaped by his own invention. That is not only myth, this is psychology. The mind is very capable of constructing systems it later cannot leave. To escape, Daedalus fashions wings from feathers and wax for himself and his son Icarus. Do not fly too low where the sea will dampen the wings, and do not fly too high where the sun will melt them. Balance, moderation, the kind of excellent advice human beings are traditionally thrilled to ignore. Icarus rises, exhilarated by freedom. He flies higher and higher. The wax melts. He falls into the sea. And suddenly the labyrinth is no longer made of stone. Now it is made of height, desire, freedom, access, and limit. Daedalus escapes. Icarus does not. And so Daedalus becomes one of myth's great uneasy geniuses, a creator of miracles that always seem to arrive holding hands with catastrophe. Knossos and the historical echo. So why does history touch this story? In 1900, the archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans excavated the Palace of Knossos on Crete and believed he had uncovered the historical bias of the labyrinth. The palace complex is vast and intricate, with hundreds upon hundreds of rooms, corridors, stairways, and shifting interior spaces. A place whose architecture could easily feed stories of winding confusion and hidden depths. Whether Knossos is literally the labyrinth of myth is another question, but it does not need to be the myth in stone to have nourished it. And then there are the bulls. Bull imagery appears everywhere in Minoan culture, most famously in the bull-leaping frescoes, where human figures vault over charging bulls in what seems to have been a ritual or ceremonial act. So the myth's obsession with the bull did not appear from nowhere, neither perhaps did its fear. Even the word labyrinth may be linked to labyrinths, the double-headed axe associated with Minoan symbolism, a house of the double axe, a palace of sacred signs, a place whose very structure and imagery may have invited legend. And then there is the land itself. Crete is seismically active. The earth moves, the ground rumbles. Some have suggested that the bellowing monster beneath the palace may preserve a memory of earthquakes, a way of turning subterranean fear into a creature with a face, which is one of myth's oldest gifts, to personify what the world is doing, so that terror becomes narratable. The labyrinth has psyche, and perhaps this is where the myth becomes most intimate. Whatever its original ingredients, ritual, architecture, politics, natural fear, the labyrinth survives because it corresponds so powerfully to inner life. In Jungian thought, myths like this can be read as archetypical dramas of the psyche. The labyrinth becomes the mind, the Minotaur becomes the shadow, the feared, rejected, repressed, or split off parts of the self. Theseus becomes conscious courage. ARIADNE'S thread becomes the line of intuition, relation, or inner guidance that prevents total psychic disorientation. And the descent inward becomes not merely combat, but confrontation, the act of meeting what has been buried. This is why the myth still lives, because most people are not trapped in literal underground corridors. They are trapped in thought loops, shame loops, fear loops, repetition, memory, old stories that keep finding new hallways. The mind builds corridors out of experience, and then walks them as if they are happening now, a perfectly ancient habitat. Habit. Biological labyrinths. And the word labyrinth is not only poetic, it is also anatomical. Inside the human ear is a literal labyrinth, a delicate structure involved in hearing and balance. Without it, we lose orientation, which feels almost too fitting. The body itself contains a labyrinth that helps us know which way is up, and beyond that, even the brain invites labyrinthine metaphors. Its folds, crossings, pathways, and memory routes exceed immediate understanding. Not a maze in the strict technical sense, of course, but certainly a structure of astonishing, winding complexity. So the labyrinth is not alien to us. It is intimate. Turing patterns and natural labyrinths. And then nature quietly joins the conversation, because sometimes the world forms labyrinths too. In animal markings, fish patterns, and dryland vegetation, complex stripes, bands, and labyrinth-like structures can emerge through self-organization. What looks chaotic may actually be patterned. What looks tangled may be deeply ordered. This is part of what makes Turing patterns so fascinating. Simple local rules can generate large-scale designs that appear intricate, organic, and almost mysterious. A fish can wear a labyrinth, a dry landscape can grow one, A living system can solve survival by organizing itself into winding form, which means the labyrinth is not only an invention of myth, it is one of nature's recurring ways of arranging complexity. Not all winding things are confusion. Some are intelligence, learning how to appear. Even the ocean remembers the shape of a labyrinth. In the ocean, brain coral forms patterns that resemble a maze, not built, but grown, shaped by the same quiet forces that organize complexity in nature, and perhaps within us. Nature and Turing patterns. So there is this quiet idea from science called Turing patterns that helps explain something unexpected, why nature so often arranges itself in patterns that resemble labyrinths. In the 1950s, the mathematician Alan Turing proposed that simple systems can generate complex patterns through a process of interaction and spread, not by design in the artistic sense, but by rules unfolding over time. Imagine two forces at work. One encourages growth in a small area, the other gently suppresses it in the surrounding space. Where one expands, the other holds back, and in that tension, patterns begin to form. Stripes, spots, branches, and sometimes winding shapes that look strikingly like labyrinths. What appears at first glance to be chaotic is often a quiet form of order, arranging itself. Fingerprint connection. In fact, one of the most intimate examples of this patterning exists on your own body. Every human fingerprint is a unique expression of this kind of self-organization. During development in the womb, ridges begin to form on the fingertips, while surrounding areas resist that growth. A kind of silent competition unfolds, expansion and limitation shaping each other. But because no two conditions are ever perfectly the same, the pressure of fluid, the position of the hand, the timing of development, each pattern settles differently. The result is something quietly extraordinary, a labyrinth that belongs only to you, a map of ridges and turns, where order emerged from conditions that were never fully controlled. Temperature and snowflakes. A similar principle appears in something far more fleeting, the formation of snowflakes. A snowflake begins with cold water vapor attaching itself to a tiny crystal of ice. As the structure grows, certain edges attract more molecules. This is the activator, while other regions grow more slowly or are limited by surrounding conditions, the inhibitor. Temperature, humidity, and air movement continuously influence this process, causing the crystal to branch outward in intricate, symmetrical forms. No two paths unfold in exactly the same way, which is why no two snowflakes are identical. Each one is a frozen moment of pattern formation, a delicate labyrinth shaped by invisible forces, forming, expanding, and vanishing. So the labyrinth is not only a structure we imagine or a place we fear, it is a pattern the world returns to again and again. Walking labyrinths and modern comfort. That may help explain why labyrinths still appear today in gardens, retreat centers, hospitals, and places of healing. Because, because unlike a maze, a labyrinth asks very little of the analytical mind. No choices, no decisions, no dead ends, just one path inward and one path back. That simplicity changes everything. A maze provokes problem solving, a labyrinth invites surrender, and perhaps that is why walking one can feel calming. It replaces the stress of deciding with the rhythm of continuing. Not confusion, not danger, just movement. A quiet mercy in patterned form. Debate section. But now we should make this slightly uncomfortable, because the story is often framed as a clean, heroic victory, and I am not entirely convinced that it is. So here's the question. Is Theseus truly the hero of the labyrinth? On one side, yes, he volunteers to face the beast. He enters the center. He ends the cycle of sacrifice. He frees Athens from terror. All excellent hero behavior, very statue-worthy. But on the other side, he succeeds only because Ariadne makes his survival possible. He kills a being who, in some traditions, is not merely a monster, but Ariadne's own brother, Asterion, a cursed child buried beneath the kingdom's shame. He abandons Ariadne, he forgets the sails, he causes his father's death. So perhaps the myth is not about a perfect hero defeating evil. Perhaps it is a person capable of immense courage while still remaining capable of betrayal, carelessness, and moral failure, which, unfortunately for all of us, is much more realistic. And maybe that is the deeper challenge on the myth. When we tell our own stories, which role do we place ourselves in? Theseus, the brave one; Ariadne, the one who makes survival possible; Daedalus, the brilliant builder; Asterion, the hidden part no one wants to name; or Minos, who built an entire system rather than face his own shame. The mind, after all, is very good at building labyrinths, and even better at casting itself in the flattering role. Perhaps that is why the myth endures, not because it tells us monsters exist, but because it asks, what do we do with what has been buried? Do we hide it, feed it, name it, fight it, understand it? Do we call it evil because that is easier than calling it ours? And what in our own lives serves as Ariadne's thread? A person, a memory, a practice, a belief, a sentence we return to, a version of ourselves we are trying not to lose. What keeps us from disappearing entirely into the inner corridors? Maybe the goal is not to destroy every labyrinth. Some labyrinths are prisons, some are rituals, some are patterns, some are minds trying very hard to protect themselves in elaborate and slightly theatrical ways. Maybe the goal is simply to know when we have entered one, to notice when the path has become inward, to remember the thread, to understand that not every monster is only a monster, and to recognize that what seems like confusion may sometimes be a structure waiting to be read differently. The old myths do not often hand us comfort directly, but they do offer companionship. They remind us that human beings have always lived among winding things, corridors, instincts, griefs, ritual patterns, mistakes, memories, longings, returns, and somehow through all of that we keep leaving threads for each other. Some labyrinths are meant to trap you, others are waiting to show you how you think. And if you become very quiet, you may notice the thread was never only behind you, it was also leading you inward, toward the part of yourself that still remembers the way. Perhaps the deepest part of the labyrinth was never the monster, but the self that had to meet it.